Hi, good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us. We'll just give it a minute or so just to let everybody connect before we dive in to today's session. But I hope everyone's well. Just give it another minute or so just to let everybody join in this afternoon, wherever you are. Okay, perfect. I make it 2 minutes past, so let's get on with the session so we can get straight into the good stuff. So hi everyone, my name's Lauren Wakefield. I'm the Marketing and Industry Programmes Director at IAB Europe, and I'm very delighted to kick off the first event in our new Corporate Responsibility and Sustainability series that we're going to be hosting across the month of April. Within the session today, we're going to be looking at why the time to act is now, and how we can address and start to have conversations around sustainability in digital advertising. I'm delighted to introduce our Chief Economist, Daniel Knapp, who will start this session by sharing an overview of what sustainability is and why it matters to our industry today. We will then hand over to Brian O'Kelly, who is the co-founder and CEO of Scope 3, who will be joined by a panel of experts from Google, Mediacom, Microsoft and Pubmatic, as they share current initiatives and what can be done from different corners of the ecosystem to help combat the problem. Brian will then be joined by his co-founder and head of product, Anne Coughlin, as they discuss how to make sustainable advertising a reality. Just before I hand over to Daniel to kick things off, a little bit of housekeeping. So this event is live today. So we do encourage you to share any questions you have for today's speakers in the Q&A box that you should be able to see at the bottom of your screen. We will also be recording the session, so we'll make sure that we send a copy of that to you after the event has finished. But Daniel, with that, I can hand over to you.
Thank you very much, Lauren, and a warm welcome to everybody. The digital advertising industry isn't short of change and transformation. We see the foundations of the industry being entirely re-architected at the moment. We're looking, I call it the long year zero, the long year where we are moving towards hopefully a new status quo. But the world around digital advertising doesn't stand still. And we in the digital ad industry often have the tendency to be very inward looking with the re-architecting that I mentioned, with our acronyms, with unlocking new channels and so forth. But advertising, like the media it often funds, is embedded in broader sociocultural, political, and economic environments. And it's crucial that we as the ad industry become more outward looking and understand how the actions that we are taking is affecting the world around us. And this isn't just about sustainability as a checkbox exercise or, as some companies do it in the sense of greenwashing. It has absolutely essential economic benefits as well, as we're coming to realize that the data-centric nature on advertising is creating lots of inefficiencies. So protecting the environment, developing sustainable strategies isn't just good for the external world, but it is also crucial for the wider ad industry to be effective, allocate budgets appropriately. I wanted to start with a short presentation to hopefully kick off the debate, a little lay of the land, and then pass back to the panelists to dive much deeper into what sustainability means and how we can really act on this call to action that we have in the industry. It's pretty clear that in terms of a macro perspective, it was COP26 that brought the topic of climate change globally to center stage. It was clear that we needed an immediate change, and this agreement of a deadline for 2050 globally for net zero to keep global temperatures below 1.5%. But the conference was fraught with diplomatic difficulties, and it was hard to really agree specifically because despite a short blip in terms of emissions, actually emissions have continued to rise globally, and they were only briefly stemmed by the reduction of travel and other traffic during COVID. And the problem is that many felt that during COP26, government and policymakers didn't go far enough. You've seen press releases, you've seen journalistic statements that COP26, despite being a very important event, also didn't really deliver on the urgency of the global situation. So we're seeing now a shifting onus on private companies and individual sectors, like advertising, like the shipping industry, for instance, to address their own emissions. And in advertising, we must use our technology. We must also revisit the practices, how we do things, from the creation of campaigns to the planning, the execution, the measurement, what tools we use, etc., to really ensure that when we're delivering advertising impact, we're also not delivering a negative impact on the environment. The ad industry has started to react. So we're seeing many different initiatives. Ad net zero initiatives, for instance, gave agencies a way to kind of focus and reduce their so-called direct emissions. But I think it's important that we also focus more on the indirect emissions generated by advertising, in particular in the supply chain. Also, as I mentioned, it's not just about the environment, but also it's about the broader economic sustainability, which has always been a question in digital advertising, i.e. is enough money, for instance, going to publishers? Can advertising really fund the fourth estate? How does advertising's role, what is advertising's role in the context of misinformation, disinformation, and so forth? We at IB Europe are creating more awareness about this and are about to launch a more structured initiative which goes beyond the declaration of intent and also tries to look at the supply chain and provide tangible recommendations on how to use the carbon footprint. You see nearly weekly new releases, new commitments. I think it's crucial here that as an industry, we do not make the mistake of overstating declarations of intent and not letting action follow suit, but that we really look at our underlying processes, look at everything, how we do our business, and implement the question of sustainability, economic and environmental, going together into our everyday practices. Why is that such an issue? Why is it an issue for the ad industry, with marketing combined probably a $3 trillion industry globally? Well, we're heavily reliant on the internet. In the US and Europe, over 50%, in some markets, even 65 to 70% of all paid media ad spend is now on the internet. And the internet's carbon footprint is on par actually with the aviation industry. There are different ways on how carbon footprint can be calculated. And with these different ways of calculation, there are also different ranges in play. But many estimates center around probably estimates like these. We have here, give or take, a couple of percentage points, but you can see the internet, and with that also the advertising industry, which relies on the internet, is a crucial component in our global attempts to reduce carbon emissions. This is just going to grow because here's our data for Europe. Despite the fact that markets are becoming very mature, digital ad markets, we're seeing continued growth above GDP levels and also above other traditional media. As we have budget migrations from other media to online, we see new spend, offline trade budgets, for instance, in retail media being unlocked and coming online. And we're also seeing many emergent markets, in particular in Southeast Asia, Latin America, with extremely high populations, but still very low online ad spend per capita compared to US and Europe, quickly ramping up online ad spend. i.e. this is not just a European problem, but this is a global problem, but we as a mature part of the industry can play a crucial role in this. I think it's also important to see that, whereas the figures I'm showing here refer to all digital advertising, the parts of digital advertising, which are particularly data-centric, are growing even faster than those which are not. Think about the deprecation of third-party cookies. Think about the rise of data cleanroom solutions, of probabilistic targeting mechanisms, the rise and explosion of data centers, the explosion of video streaming services, the merging of different ID solutions and so forth. Things which are fixes for our industry to get our pipes going and working and stopping them from breaking, might also have a negative effect on the environment. So we do need to balance this. And internet usage overall, not just advertising, is going to explode. So we're going to see data transfer going to grow 44x in the next couple of years, whereas energy savings are only growing around in the same period, depending on the source you consult, by around 10, 13, 15%. And I think an important issue also is not just about the technology, so the video explosion, the mobile internet, the endemic issues in the ad industry that I mentioned, but it's also consumer expectations of having high quality rendered content, ad units, creatives, and so forth. So meeting consumer expectations and meeting sustainability goals are not always the same part of the coin. I think it's important that we move beyond the marketing message and brand behavior, and also beyond certification, to other things. So today, when we speak about in the industry about sustainability, often it is things like this: Patagonia, big claim, don't buy this jacket, we can repair it for you, that reduces the carbon footprint. We also see companies backing up commitments to its own sustainability marketing with commitments, with donations. We're seeing specialist companies out there in the programmatic space making donations, planting trees and so forth. But there's of course a lagging effect here. If you plant trees right now, they'll only be able to effectively reduce carbon emissions in about 15, 20 years' time. And it's important for us as an industry to really look behind the screen and to have a stronger focus on the complexities of the supply chain. So what you see here on the left is a snap, and on the right as well, but on the left predominantly, a snapshot of the programmatic supply chain of a single advertiser on a single publisher before it has been optimized with SPO, i.e. reducing redundant supply paths, limiting the amount of DSPs and SSPs available in the auction and so forth. What we have on the right side is the same supply chain cleaned up with fewer parties involved, fewer QPS costs, and fewer kind of technical complexities involved. And it's things like these indirect emissions that we are producing as an industry by not having optimized supply chain that have actually tremendous implications for our ability to be a sustainable industry. So we must shift our focus really to these indirect emissions. What drives these emissions? I think we can see consider the internet really a kind of a supply chain of data-heavy technologies. Data centers, the cloud is nothing elusive, but it's a physical infrastructure consuming lots of energies. We got core networks, we got content delivery networks, CDNs, access networks, and then the devices that the consumers use. And all of these different things produce energy, consume energy when we put a 300 by times 50 banner unit through them. So what can we do as an industry? This is by far no comprehensive conclusion, but there are a few things that are already becoming apparent beyond declarations of intent. Number one, increase the efficiency of the data transfers that we're using. So really try to reduce the amount of energy it takes to transfer our data. And then reduce the amount of data being sent itself. Do we always need to send the highest resolution creative? Do we need to send creatives for information for ads that aren't in view and so forth? So we can be much smarter about this, in particular with all the exhaust data about campaign reporting that we have in our industry, which we at the IAB think should really inform strategies of optimizing how we can be more sustainable. And then, of course, there's the big call to supply the internet with green energy only, which is a great idea, but green energy is finite. And even if some large platform companies now are powered exclusively by green energy, the pool of green energy available in the world isn't growing fast enough. And this means that all these efforts need to work in concert, i.e. only when we reduce the energy being consumed overall, can also be more green energy be made available for others to take advantage of. There's a lot of talk about offsetting, i.e. planting trees, donating, etc. But offsetting really isn't good enough to solve the problem. And we're seeing that our industry understands that it needs to move beyond carbon offsetting. So how can we do that? It's about technology, but not just about the tech. It's how we operationalize it and how we work as the industry. One thing that we've looked a lot at IB Europe is, of course, supply path optimization. How can we reduce the complexity of our supply chains that we have, in particular in programmatic? And here, SPO 2.0 would combine economic and environmental sustainability. So this is about reducing the duplication or multiplication of ad calls, which increase energy consumption, limit the amount of actors and agents in the chain, the number of intermediaries, the number of hops in the chain. And also we need to understand that lost bids, i.e. ads that aren't being delivered, also consume energy, in particular if there are multiple parties involved in an auction. We need to be more considerate with targeting. Of course, in the post-third-party cookie, post-ATT world, how we reach consumers, how we address consumers in a personalized manner is a huge issue. But if we're running multiple identity solutions at the same time, if we're experimenting or working with contextual targeting, with other probabilistic ways of targeting, if we're looking at topics, other cohort-based approaches, ID-based approaches concurrently, this creates a lot of compute resources, which all consume energies. And so are new ML-based classification systems, which are being now discussed and developed and deployed at scale with differential privacy and others as well. So things that solve industry problems might not solve the responsibility that the industry has at large. Ad fraud is an issue, of course, we know in the industry, but if we combine it with lost bids, won bids, ads that aren't seen by people, ads that aren't being seen overall, ad fraud also now has an impact on how sustainable we can be as an industry. And lastly, coming back to the broader technical infrastructure, we need to think about the assets that we're delivering, when and which files to, when to send files, which files to send, etc. And also, do we have a way to optimize which resolution of an ad, for instance, goes to which resolution of a screen? Again, lots of exhaust data available, but we're not using it properly. So these things together, technological innovation and behavioral change, are required for us to make a really profound impact. So it's three things. It's people, the people that are, as citizens, people in the industry, what we do for the planet, what's our responsibility in the industry, and how we can combine that with making ads also more effective and efficient. As if we're cleaning up the supply chain, it might also mean higher working media, less duplication, etc. And with that, I would like to close. Thank you very much for your attention. This is just a small snapshot of how big the problem is and things that we can do under the hood of the industry. And I look forward to hearing the concrete solutions and ideas of our panelists. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Daniel. That was really insightful. There's a lot there, I think, for everyone to take in and digest. So really appreciate you taking the time to do that for us. So to continue the conversation now, we're just going to let our panelists into the room. So we'll have Brian O'Kelly, who's the CEO and co-founder of Scope 3, moderating the panel session today, where our speakers will discuss current initiatives and what can be done from different corners of the ecosystem to help combat the problem. So just really continuing that conversation there that Daniel kicked off. So we'll just let everybody join in. And then when we have Brian on the line, I can hand over to you. I think we're just letting everybody in slowly. I can see Emma, I can see Adrian, I can see Adam. Welcome everybody. Claire, there's Claire, brilliant. And do we have Brian? I can see Brian, perfect. I will hand, it's very early in the morning for you, isn't it, Brian? So I'll hand over to you to kick off.
It's not that bad. The sun's slowly rising here in Brooklyn. Well, first, I want to thank Daniel for that amazing presentation. It was great to see the sort of full scope of the opportunity and also the challenge that we face as an industry and really as a civilization. So when we think about it at such a macro level, it can be hard to think about what it means for us as professionals in the industry. And so I'm excited to have a panel with a broad range of perspectives. And so I'd really like to kick off by asking each panelist for an introduction. If you could tell us who you are, what you do, and maybe where sustainability sits as a priority for you personally, as well as for the company you work for, that would be fantastic. And we're going to try to go in alphabetical order. So Adam, you're first.
Thanks very much, Brian, and thanks very much to IAB for hosting this event this morning. It's such an important topic, so really pleased we're able to get together and have this conversation. I joined Google fairly recently as head of sustainability for Europe, Middle East and Africa. I'm extremely passionate about sustainability. I have been working in this space for 15 plus years across a range of industries and organizations like Marks and Spencer and Amazon. And part of the reason I'm passionate about this topic is it's something that affects everybody, and everybody in this room will be feeling the impact of climate change in some way. In fact, the Edelman Trust Barometer showed that 72% of the population are concerned or fearful about the topic. And I really believe that every part of society, including business, has an important role to play. Now, the recent IPCC reports have really highlighted the urgency of taking action and the implications if we don't. But I'm an optimist, and the reports also point to the fact that we have the tools and we have the technology and the solutions to really tackle climate change. Now, sustainability and climate change has been a core focus of Google since its founding. We aim to build sustainability into everything we do, whether that's our offices, our data centers, how we operate, but also building it into our services and our devices, and importantly, enabling others through the use of our technology to also take action. We're in our third decade of climate action here. In 2007, we were the first major company to be carbon neutral. In 2017, we achieved our goal to match 100% of our electricity with renewables. And now we're focused on our moonshot goals of being net zero carbon across our operations and value chain by 2030 and operating on 24/7 carbon-free energy. And we're using our tools, our funding and our talent really to help others scale up their climate action and to help everyone make sustainable choices. And with that, I'll hand over to Adrian.
Cool, thanks Adam. Brian, loving the backdrop, excellent as we're talking about this topic. So for me, I look after the global agency relationship with Dentsu in Microsoft advertising. I feel really passionate about sustainability, as all the panelists do. There's things that we can do every day in our day-to-day life, but what we wanted to do as well between Dentsu and Microsoft advertising is to see how did the people really think about sustainable media and what does sustainable advertising mean to the general public. We recently produced a global study to better understand that, as we honestly felt that as the sort of COVID narrative would slow down, we're not done with COVID yet, or rather COVID's not done with us yet, we honestly felt that climate would be more front and center thinking to the general population. And, as Adam said, from the independent surveys, it shows that from our own survey, actually 86% of people are concerned about the climate, which is just incredible. And they're more concerned about the climate than the health and wellness of their own family and friends. They're more concerned about the climate than having a roof over their head. And they're more concerned about the climate than the current COVID pandemic, admittedly by only 1 percentage point. But yes, they certainly are. So, it's highly relevant, and delighted that we're able to have this panel today to really be a call to action for the industry to really address this. In Microsoft, we launched a climate innovation fund where we wanted to remove every piece of carbon that we've ever put into the environment since our inception in 1975. And that $1 billion fund was launched to fuel the innovation that's needed for that carbon removal. We still have a long way to go, particularly on scope 3, but have made some headway already in 1 and 2. So it's great that the industry, the advertising industry, is looking at this as well, of where we can make significant impact. So for me, I'm now going to pass over to Claire. Over to you, Claire.
Thank you very much. Hi everyone, I'm Claire Ritchie, Global Head of Programmatic for Mediacom. I'm going to start with the personal. Personally, sustainability is hugely important for me. It always has been, but recently even more so. I'm a mother of 2 small children, so we're learning together about our environmental impact, appreciating cost and the value that's greater than what we can see, and ultimately shortening our own supply chain, even if it is by growing tomatoes at home. Those same principles apply professionally. Mediacom's ethos is seeing the bigger picture, which includes supporting our clients, our people, and the advertising industry in the transition to a more sustainable future. It's not a new approach for us. We're a founding member of the IPA Climate Charter, and we've shared our carbon calculator for the industry to benefit from and grow with. But I think for me, the exciting thing is that this is something that's genuinely felt within our business. It's accessible from everyone. It is a core pillar for our ExCo as people and planet, but it's something that everybody can get involved with. On to Ella.
Thank you. So my name is Emma Newman and I am Pubmatic's Chief Revenue Officer for EMEA. I'm going to keep my intro short so we can actually get to the panel discussion. So I became interested in sustainability in advertising when I was at an outdoor company. They did have a sustainability and an environment team because it generates a lot of waste in terms of paper. And that has to go somewhere, so they need to be disposed of responsibly. And then obviously as it became a digital organization, there's the whole energy issue as well. So that sort of sparked my interest in sustainability and advertising. And I'm delighted that at Pubmatic, this has become one of our priorities. We're fairly early in our journey. So I don't have any data particularly to share with you in terms of research that we've done, but it is something that we're very passionate about. So let's get on with the conversation, I think.
Love it. And thank you all for those awesome introductions. And one thing that it makes me think about that I've heard as I talk to people around the space is like, where is sustainability on the priority list for the industry? So we heard about why it's important personally and for your companies, but curious from your perspective, what's driving this forward? Adrian, in that study, something I thought was really cool was it said, for CMOs, in 5 years, they think that sustainability will be the most important topic, but it's not today. Like, what's changing in those 5 years, and what's causing that right now, given, what was it, 72% of people care? What's that disconnect and how does it change?
Yeah, and I think honestly, Brian, it comes down to consumer behavior. Consumer behavior often takes, a few stepped processes before they would make a systemic change themselves. So, we saw a sort of U-bend effect, if you like, in that, yes, there was a high proportion of people said that they would absolutely want to buy products from sustainable sources. They wanted to be using platforms that were in a sustainable environment. But really, actually, then we look at it that only sort of 25% said that they would actively opt out of adverts today, which aren't produced through sustainable means. So, it's I think it just takes a bit of time for the consumer to get there. But then also, there is the stat in there that said that absolutely in 5 years' time, they only want to be spending money with brands who practice green and sustainable advertising and practices. So yes, it comes down to the fact that the people are asking for it, but brands can get ahead of it if they, really embrace it today, because it is definitely coming. And by 5 years' time, the world will be a very different place. You touched on it. It was Daniel that touched on it in the presentation. It starts a lot with the infrastructure on which the advertising is run, and I think that really helps. Daniel spoke about how, one of the ways that we can address this as an industry is to make sure that there is green energy through the data center solution. So, it really comes down to that infrastructure. Take, for example, Ecosia. There was talk about planting trees. Well, they're a search engine that plants trees, but actually their entire infrastructure is also powered by actually powered by solar. And they're currently at about sort of 200–300% of their use case of their need. So the reality is that actually now you've got a search engine that is selling green energy back to the grid because their own data centers, are only using a small proportion of what they're producing. So, I think there's a lot of it that comes down to the accountability of us in the industry, and where the people are getting to of, only wanting to buy from brands that are going to make a difference in this space.
It's a fascinating point. And Ecosia actually 200%, meaning like for every kilowatt hour of electricity they use, they have 2 or 3 kilowatt hours of solar.
Yep, exactly right. So it's incredible that you've got a search engine that's now becoming an energy company because they're selling green energy back to the grid.
I'm sort of amazed that we have Microsoft and Google, and we're talking about another search engine. So that's pretty cool. And it's a European search engine. Claire, I'm curious from your perspective, if you look across, Mediacom as a big buyer of media, and you hear something like that, how do you think about something like Ecosia in the context of, I know it's not probably in your remit in programmatic, but imagining that you're looking at different places to spend money, and you're thinking about performance, and you're thinking about a brief. Like, how does that impact the way you think about this, both with your job hat on, and you were very articulate about your own personal supply chain? How do you balance that, and how does that come together as you think about your clients?
I think programmatic has always been held to kind of increasingly high standards of transparency and clarity. And we've been driving towards better practice in and around SPO and efficiency and fraud for a long time. So there's a natural synergy here. Granted, there's still a holdback from a kind of a cost versus value perspective. And I think we need to explore this further with clearer, appropriate measurements with our clients and our brands to show the bigger picture value of responsible investment, and that actually we're not comparing apples to apples here. I think awareness and education is certainly bringing sustainability much closer to this. And actually, as a media buying entity, we are in a very good position to make a positive change because we can control and direct where we do spend media. And if we can educate and develop our understanding and our frameworks to include more and more considered investment, rather than investment necessarily just relating to a direct KPI, but maybe investment taking into consideration overall business goals, then we're in a really, really good place to support this and really drive it forward.
Adam, that makes me think of what you said about a moonshot to go net zero. And it's incredible what Google has done, and Microsoft actually have both made amazing investments, billions and billions of dollars. One thing that I wonder about is when you talk about it being a moonshot, that kind of makes me feel intimidated. Like, Google can do moonshot. I mean, Google probably really does moonshots. As far as we know, Google's on the moon. But like, what is it that, any other company who's not one of the biggest two companies in the entire world can do? And then how do you think about making that decision based on today business needs? So, Claire's thinking about responsible investment for programmatic. Like, there's a business case here, but there's also this moral or personal ethical case. Like, we should do this because we want to save the planet. I'm curious, both from your Google perspective and your background, because you've been at a bunch of companies, like, how do you make that case to your boss? Like, anyone listening to this webinar, we're doing a moonshot, boss. Kind of a hard pitch. So how do you think about that?
Yeah, and I think it's a great question. And I think the sort of this business case aspects, it's really important. And I think, the public are voting with their feet. Consumers are increasingly asking for it. You've got employees demanding it. You've got shareholders increasingly requiring it. And so, it's really not a should we do, but how quickly must we do this? I mean, we see through Google a 5 times increase in searches for more sustainable products in the last 5 years. And, lots of other stats about how people are increasingly searching out for more sustainable goods and services. So I don't think it's really a question of what's holding back. It should be how quickly can you go? And I think, to your point, people are on different places on their journey. One of the things we try and do as Google is really help the wider system in terms of helping people take action. So we're putting funding into new standards and new technologies. Just one example may be thinking about the sort of small and medium enterprises. We recently funded a tool with a company called Normative. We also put 12 Googlers spent 6 months working full time on supporting the release of this tool, which is a carbon calculator for small, medium enterprises to calculate their scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3 carbon emissions. So to your point, not everyone necessarily has the scale and the resources that we do at Google, but we want to use our funding and our talent to help others all go on this journey, because everyone needs to go on this journey. And it's important to remember that scope 3 emissions, for most businesses, that could be up to 90% of their carbon emissions. And that's the broader value chain, the broader supply chain. So, you know, for us to achieve our goals, we require everyone to come with us on this journey, which is why it's really important, as I say, we try and help the wider ecosystem.
Yeah, and for those who haven't tried that normative carbon calculator, Adam, if you don't mind putting the link or something on this, I did it for my little company because I've actually done almost every carbon calculator at this point, because I'm sort of obsessed with this balance between like making it easy and making it comprehensive and accurate. And I think that's a real tension that we're facing. And I think the normative team with Google did a really good job of finding a balance where you don't have to do everything. You can do a little bit of work and you can get a pretty good measurement. And then the more information you give it, the better it gets. I think that's kind of the right mindset for all of us. Like, this is about progress, not being perfect. And Emma, what I loved about your intro was you talked about how important sustainability is for Pubmatic, but you acknowledge that you're in the beginning of the process. So I'd love to understand more about how that feels, and you know, how do you prioritize sustainability on the journey? Because I think everyone's on the journey, well, 72% of us, but what does that journey feel like, and how does that feel as part of a big company, you know, a big public company now that's trying to operate globally and help clients? Like, what is that like for you?
So I think that first and foremost, there needs to be an understanding within the organization of what sustainability actually is, because like many things, like transparency, which is the other thing that we talk about a lot as an industry, it means different things to different people. So I think it's understanding what sustainability means for you as an organization first and foremost, because to your point, you can't do everything, and you have to start somewhere. And I think that is often what holds people back, because they feel like they have to do the moonshot from day one, and that's just not feasibly possible. So I think first of all, figure out what sustainability actually means for you as an organization. And for us, it was really about looking initially at our energy consumption via our data centers, and how do we ensure that we have the most efficient and effective infrastructure in place that we possibly can to run a large global organization, to your point, Brian. So, and one of the decisions we made, the part of the decision-making process that we had to own our own infrastructure, was that by owning it ourselves, we had more control over what we were using and the supply chain involved. So that was a really good starting point for us. And that's something that obviously we will continue to iterate. And then if you come out of that and just think about, right, what can we do to, as more from an industry perspective, one of the things that we've done in the UK is we've become a member of Net Zero. So I do feel as though as an industry, working together, we're probably going to be able to pull everybody along the journey, because not everybody's going to be able to move along that journey as quickly as others. So by collectively coming together, I think that it's like the tide that rises all boats. So joining Net Zero was one of the things that we've decided to do. So we've only just become members. So I'm looking forward to going to my first meeting, finding out what I don't know yet, and we'll take it from there.
That's exciting. And I think we've seen so much industry action. I mean, the fact that we're doing this panel, I think, is indicative of the fact that we are coming together collectively to explore this. And so one question I have, though, is like, what's holding this back? Like, what are the things that are keeping us as people, as companies, as an industry, from really making this a priority? So Adrian, let me go back to you on that. Like, what do you think is keeping us from, what are the blockers from making this more of a priority?
Yeah, got it. And I think, you know, a lot of this I touched on a little bit earlier is really, first off, that companies are starting to do the work. Emma, love that, you know, you're sort of looking at the data centers and should you own it, should you not? And what impact does that have? You know, more companies, more brands need to look at that. And, you know, to your question earlier as well, Brian, I think that, you know, we can help speed this up by showing what are the easy steps that companies can do, the simple things that they can operate by. So, you know, yes, looking at data centers, but definitely yes as well, looking at the ad placements and where you are running your advertising. So, you know, this is something that every brand can do. In Microsoft Advertising, we have a labeling function where in your advertising, you can put marketing with purpose business priorities down. So you can say if you are already, you know, net zero or climate focused, and many others as well, sort of business priorities. So, you know, a lot of it comes down to how we start thinking about positioning it and telling those authentic narrative stories. You know, we know that authenticity and marketing with purpose go hand in hand. So we are storytellers fundamentally. So by us telling those authentic stories of how we as individuals and with the brands that we work with are leaning into this space, I think will speed things up as well. As to other blockers, as we saw from the research, fundamentally people are starting to think about this, but they're not necessarily acting as fast as they can. So I really do think it comes back to us and the industry on how we can drive this narrative forwards. It's really fascinating to see that so many people, 91% of people actually, put the accountability on brands and on us as the ad platforms and positioning of it. So, it really is down to us, second only to government. So, I feel that the blockers are really the fact that we're not taking the immediate action that we need to. Narratives like this are great. The work that Emma's doing of looking at, the supply chain are critical, and we just need to do more of that. We need to get started now.
Yeah, and fortunately, Claire, that leads to the hardest question on the panel, which I have to ask you now, which is, if brands have to do 95% of the work, and your job is to help brands tell those stories that Adrian's referencing, how do we help brands move faster, care more, deliver results, while being authentic to their mission and where they are in these journeys? You're welcome.
Great question. But I think this isn't just about one section of people, and it's not about one section of the industry. We should and are all accountable for what goes on. And I think where we will succeed faster is through supported collaboration. And lightly or otherwise, finger pointing and passing the problem is never going to solve it. We cannot just focus on the little piece of the puzzle that is in front of us. We need to be accountable for what is in our control, but actively working to understand and better what is not directly in our control. And I think from my perspective, where we see the greatest challenge is people trying to do everything at once. And I think actually there is a real opportunity for our brands to think about what their businesses stand for, what's important to them. Similar to what Emma was saying, from a Pubmatic perspective, it's important we all evaluate our businesses in this way to understand where our ethos meets opportunity. Because if we can hone that, we can really focus in on getting into the weeds of an area and solving a problem, we can make a real impact. And that's an impact that should then be shareable with other businesses in the industry, other likewise businesses in the industry, so that we can move that further and faster. And I think we have a highly competitive industry where that is not always the case, but I'm really pleased to see that when it comes to things like sustainability and consideration, for the most part, we do tend to pop the walls down and work slightly better together.
I think that's one of the best quotes I've ever heard about climate change, which is, look for opportunities where your ethos meets opportunity. Like, that's when you take action. That's incredible, because that's really what we're looking for, is that Venn diagram of what we can do and what we should do. And of course, we can't do everything we should do at all times, but that is really, really compelling as a way to think about this. And I love what you said about what's you're capable of being accountable for, because everyone listening to this is accountable for something. And if you're not, I want your job. But I think that accountability that we can all take, you're not talking about doing crazy things for your business. You're not talking about being a crazy activist here, but it's really finding those moments of intersection. And everyone can take that away from this, that is what we are asked to do as members of this global civilization. So I really, really love that mindset. Adam, one thing that I think about in context of Google's mission here and how you've seen this over time is this tension, I think, between the mission you're on as a company. And it's the same question, I think, for Claire, but in a slightly different way, which is, what do you do to nudge your partners and customers toward those moments of opportunity? Like, what are those opportunities, if you think about this from the Google platform, to do the right thing?
Thanks, Brian. I mean, I think the first thing is, we've set these big moonshot goals. So we've set a very clear direction about what we need to achieve. And when I talk about our net zero goal, that's our operations and the value chain. So we work very closely with our partners, with our supply chain, and it very much is in partnership to achieve these goals. And a lot of that is sharing our knowledge, being open source, sharing our best practices, and taking action. If I give you one example, I mentioned the work we've done on renewable energy, but we're also, for example, focused on enabling 5 gigawatts of renewable energy in regions where we manufacture. That's for other people's benefit, but if we don't take action, we know that they may struggle to come on that journey. But as I say, the sheer nature of the work we're doing on our own platform and our own infrastructure, similar to what Adrian said, people can come over, use our infrastructure and get the benefit of the efforts that we've been doing for many years. I think the other piece in this is the tools and the insights that we can provide. We work very closely with our customers, providing the insight in terms of what people are looking for, what messages are resonating, how they can best land those messages. But I think finally, and it relates back to the point that Emma made earlier, this is a team sport. No one can do this alone, and we really do need to work in collaboration, which is why we work closely with the IAB. We're also very closely involved with AgNet Zero. So I think the more we can work together, the more we can find these solutions and open source them, the easier it will become for everyone to take action and take action quickly.
Yeah, I love that. So Emma, coming back to your journey and how you think about this, I'm sort of stuck on this idea of, storytelling and the mission we all have here. Because I think Adam, your point of, Google making these investments on behalf of the industry feels a lot like what we're hearing. It's a consistent theme of collaboration and working together. So Emma, if you think about this from the perspective of Pubmatic and the sort of global, almost infrastructure role you play here, how do you convey sustainability in a day-to-day context to the people you're dealing with in your role?
Oh, well, so I think it differs depending upon who we are talking to. I think that actually when we talk predominantly to buyers and publishers, right? So, and we talk a lot about the things that Daniel was talking about, which is around supply path optimization or demand path optimization, dependent upon which side of the coin you're looking at. And, how do you simplify your supply chain? How do you make sure that you are working with the most efficient and effective partners? So that's a conversation that we've been having for quite some time now. How do you ensure that your advertising is best targeted so that you're not driving a ton of wastage? So how do we help advertisers to target their advertising better across the publishers on our platform? How do we help publishers make their impressions more addressable so that we don't have this wastage, which will only potentially become worse once the cookie finally deprecates? So how do we get ahead of that now to try and reduce that wastage? How do we simplify the supply chain and help people to make those kinds of decisions? And then actually, what are we doing as individuals? I mean, there's a really simple thing that all individuals can do, which is, and I've started to do it every morning for about 10 minutes every morning, is just unsubscribe from a ton of email. So I get horrified when I log into my personal inbox and see all of the email that's come in overnight, none of which, by the way, I ever read. I just automatically delete it all, but that isn't actually helping. It's emptying my inbox, but it's not doing anything for the environment. So, and instead of now just deleting everything while my coffee is brewing, I just spend a few minutes unsubscribing myself from a load of emails that I can't even remember subscribing to, frankly. So, I think there are different levels at which you can have these conversations. So I think personally it's about that, and then professionally it's about how do we simplify things, how do we take stuff out of the ecosystem, and how do we reduce wastage by providing better targeting capabilities.
That's awesome. Now I feel even better about unsubscribing from every email.
See, me too. It's like a weight.
It made me feel like I'm a climate activist almost. So we've got some amazing questions from the audience. And so I really want to give everybody a chance to answer those. And I'm not going to make everybody answer every question. But this first question from Lucas Mesger is a great one. How can we as an industry avoid the offset trap, the seemingly easy solution of just buying cheap carbon credits, allowing us to call ourselves carbon neutral instead of doing what is right, actually reducing our emissions by lowering our and our customers and users' energy consumption? Awesome question. Anybody want to take a swing?
Definitely.
Adam.
I'd love to start on that one.
Adrian and Adam.
Oh, sorry, go for it, Adam.
You sure? Okay, I'll jump in and you can build on it, Adrian, I'm sure. So look, I think, from a Google perspective, Google went carbon neutral back in 2007. And we knew at the time that offsets was an imperfect solution, but it allowed us to take action at that time. And we very quickly moved to focusing on decarbonisation. I've spoken about the shift to renewables, but really looking at how we decarbonise right across our business and our value chain. And as I say, we're now focused really on that value chain piece and what action we can take and how we can support that decarbonisation effort. So you're absolutely right. We do need to actively decarbonise. At the same time, we're looking to improve the standards. We invest in high quality offsets, but we're investing into providing funding into the standards so they can become more robust and more credible. And I'd also say we're very much focused on, along with other businesses, removals, because actually, and again, IPCC really focuses on this as well. Alongside decarbonisation, we need to actually actively take carbon out of the atmosphere as well. So yes, it's an imperfect tool, and yes, we need to decarbonise at the same time. It cannot just be the solution.
Yeah. Adrian, want to add to that?
Yeah, definitely. I'm going to go a slightly different angle actually, because the as the question sort of digging as well of like, offsetting as opposed to doing what is right. I'd actually say that it can actually start with each company figuring out who they are, understanding what culture they are, how they, what they stand for, how do they talk about what they stand for generally. Because then as they start to sort of get to know thyself, then they can see how they can position their own narratives and would want to lean in and make sustainable choices, as opposed to just looking for the quick, easy way out. We actually launched a Marketing with Purpose course a couple of years ago now to help businesses try to understand their own culture and what it is that they stand for. And we've seen that definitely helps sort of give a overarching view of who you are, what you stand for, what you want to lean into, which then gives you the passion in the business to want to lean into places that matter to you most. And then by definition, you end up having those, as I touched on earlier, authentic stories that you would want to tell of how you're leaning in on this space instead of just looking for that quick, easy option. I'll put a link to it in the chat.
Don't we also have the responsibility as an industry to help educate everybody? Because there may be an organization that says, well, I'm offsetting, therefore I'm doing the right thing, and this is what I should be doing, and I feel good about it. But and they may genuinely think that that's the right thing for them to do, and actually sometimes it may be the right thing. It could be the only thing that they could do at that particular moment in time. But ignorance isn't an excuse. I understand that, but I think we need to do more to educate ourselves and the industry at large with regards to what does good look like. Because 5 years ago, offsetting was what good looked like, and we've become more aware of that. Maybe that might not be the only route, or may not even be the right route to take, but not everybody is. And I think collectively as an industry, we should probably do a little bit more about educating ourselves and each other as to what good actually looks like.
Claire, one thing that makes me think of is I was reading the WPP commitment to go net zero by 2030. And it's both a commitment to reduce emissions by 50% and to get all the way there using offsets. Is that a way to sort of balance both, like to do a both and here? We have to reduce, but as Adam said, that's not enough, because we actually have to pull carbon out of the environment if we want to either overshoot and come back down to 1.5 degrees. Or do you have a perspective on that, given this sort of amazing commitment that WPP has made?
Yeah, and look, I think that's the umbrella statement over hundreds of small commitments being made by all of the WPP companies, because it's being made up of carbon neutral campaign planning and management, and also being net zero in areas of the supply chain that we can obviously manage. And there's different goals and milestones that we need to achieve on that route to do that. And I think, like we've heard several times today, it's not about what we're doing now, it's about where we can get to. And I have no doubt from where we were 5 years ago to where we will be in 5 years' time, that actually our balance and our approach to how much can be offset, how much can be total changes in the way that we work, is going to differ, because we don't know everything. We can't see into the future. Like Emma said a minute ago, we thought we were in a great place carbon offsetting 5 years ago, because that's what we understood, that's what the science told us, that's what we had available to our fingertips. And that's going to continue to change. And what I think I would say to any individual or business is be prepared for that to change. And that's okay. We don't know all the answers. Understand where you are today, understand where you'd like to be, but prepared to find out that you are wrong, and you may have to change tack and be flexible in your approach. I think that's how we can get to the best end.
I love that. And I think, Emma, what you were saying about our need to educate is the flip side of needing to learn, I think. So we all have an obligation to learn. And then, Claire, what you said about being flexible is inherently like a growth mindset. Like, we're all trying to learn and grow and develop. And this ties to the last question I want to really quickly run to is, someone asked, who's paying for all this? Is it being paid for by the advertiser, the publisher? My personal answer is, thank you, Google and Microsoft. It sounds like you're just going to pay for the whole thing. But what is the sort of next maybe 24 months look like for all of us? And what should we be doing to learn and grow as individuals? So really quick, because we only have 3 more minutes, but if we could go really quickly around, I'd love to just get a quick perspective on what's next. So Adrian, maybe you want to kick us off?
Yeah, sure. So I'll just make mine really, really quick because we haven't got much longer left. Is just get candid on climate. Like, number one, that's it. Like, yes, embrace, learn, share, just get candid on it. No more excuses. Thanks.
Love that. Adam, you're next, I guess.
Thanks, Brian. I think we should need to change the narrative for thinking sustainability is a cost. Sustainability, there's a strong business case for sustainability. It's not bad for business, it's good for business. I've mentioned earlier about, employees demanding it, customers wanting it, shareholders expecting it. There's a really strong business case. So take action wherever you are on your journey. If you're starting in the journey, start to measure, start to talk to your customers, start to talk to your employees. If you're further down the journey, setting goals, taking action, whatever it may be, but yeah, start.
Love that. Emma?
Well, you just stolen my thunder there, Adam. I was going to say exactly the same thing. So I think it is about narrative, which is we talk about the cost to us as an industry. I think it's more about an investment in our future, not just, obviously the planet's future, but also an investment in the future of our industry. Because if we don't take action and we don't do something about this, then the consumer ultimately and the brands are going to make up their own minds. And as an industry, we're not really going to exist. So I think it's less about thinking about who's paying for it and thinking more about how do we invest in our industry to tackle the demands that are being made of us, and quite rightly so, by both the brands and the consumer.
Love that. All right, Claire, take us out. You get the final word.
I think we all need to take a small step back. I think everyone needs to look in a more holistic way to what is going on, both in their own businesses and around them. We're so used to focusing on the end emission that actually we need to get a little bit smarter than that. And I think understanding where we are in the value chain, understanding where we have control and where we don't, is incredibly powerful. And the more we can accept lack of control, the better we can collaborate to create that control and to create that change. But ultimately, I would say to people to challenge themselves, and do they know what it is they are buying when they buy their media?
Love that. So many incredible insights from this panel. I really, really appreciate each of you participating. And wow, I hope everyone listening took a lot of notes, because I certainly did. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you, Adrian, Emma, Claire, and Adam, and also Brian for moderating that. As we said, lots to take away, lots of insights there. So a lot for us to all dive into. Brian, we're going to keep you where you are because we have your co-founder and head of product joining us now for a presentation where you're going to talk a bit more about how to make sustainable advertising a reality, and I believe look into how to measure, reduce and offset carbon emissions in the programmatic supply chain. So I'll hand the floor back to you and we look forward to this presentation.
Thank you very much. I thought maybe I should do a costume change between my panelist job.
Just put a hat on or something.
All right, next time. I sort of forgot to introduce myself before that panel. And I think it might be helpful to just go back to the beginning of my career in ad tech. So in 2003, I joined a little ad network called Right Media, where I was the chief technology officer. And my job was to try to figure out how to build this real-time predictive ad technology that could, optimize ads. But part of my job was to talk to publishers and to convince them that our tech and our ad network would produce the best returns. And I'd call these publishers. Sometimes I would cold call them. And I would say, hey, our network is great. You should give us some inventory. And they would say, well, what's your average CPM? And I was like, who cares what our average CPM is? You only care about the CPM of this actual impression. Like, send the next one to somebody else. And it just really confused them. It blew their minds. Like they were operating on averages. And this made it impossible for them to make the best decision for every single impression. And so I think we all know where that went. I was like, we need real-time decisioning for publishers. And we invented the SSP. And then I realized that none of the other ad networks could make decisions on a per impression basis. So we invented the ad exchange to help advertisers make decisions per impression, not on average. And the rest is kind of history, DSPs and DMPs and header bidding. And now we have SPO 2.0. So it all comes back to this basic idea that if you're operating on averages, you can't make good informed decisions.
Yeah, and I think that when we, so I'm Anne, head of product at Scope 3, and when Brian and I were kind of realizing the way that the industry right now thinks about carbon calculation and understanding the emissions in the value chain, we were minds were kind of blown that every major company in the world really uses averages to get to that decision. So just to kind of set the scene a little bit, I'm going to walk you through an analogy to help understand kind of where we're at and why we think that the more granular measurement is better. So I'm going to take you to my imaginary supermarket early this afternoon, where all the calories are handily printed on my receipt, grouped by food type. So, obviously when I go to the supermarket, first thing that goes into my shopping trolley is ice cream. It's my favorite. I buy some yogurt because it's on sale. I buy some bread. And then I, go to the vegetable aisle and stock up on vegetables. So when I get home, imagine my receipt looks something like this. There was a sale on yogurt. So dairy's looking pretty good in terms of the amount of calories there. And bread, high calories per euro, per pound overall. And so, if I'm sitting down to decide what to have for dinner, obviously the solution is not an unhealthy choice, in my opinion, a great choice. I'm just going to stock up and fill my belly with ice cream. And this is really just not, I guess, ideal in the way that decisions are being made for the health of my body. But really, that's kind of the problem that we're seeing into category averages and how that leads to unhealthy choices.
So you're basically saying that this is the same analogy we were talking about from an advertising perspective almost 20 years ago. Those averages don't make sense. And I think for us, looking at sustainability for the last few years, I guess I was kind of shocked that companies are using these averages to make climate decisions. And every major company, this is the gold standard right now, is for this complicated scope 3, which is your supply chain of emissions, which, as Adam just said, is 90% or more of most companies' emissions. We calculate based on that kind of spin-based average. And so what does that mean? Like, what is that? How can we be still in the world of averages in one of the most important parts of our world? And what does that mean for advertising?
Yeah, I think, if you think about this diagram here of, or this weighing scale here of, do I advertise on out of home or do I advertise in print? When an agency is looking at their plan and deciding, if a newspaper has invested, I don't know, millions of euros in electric delivery vans, that doesn't really translate into a decision for the agency. If they say, our print supply chain just dropped by 20%, so actually you should probably spend more on your print channel. The problem really is that because the agency is looking at category averages, the more that the companies are investing, so the more that this print company is investing in sustainable technology, the more they're diverging from that average. And similarly, if they're doing nothing on their sustainability journey, they're diverging from that average. The agency is not really going to be able to make the decision that investing more in one channel or another is going to be good for their own total emissions in their value chain.
Right. So the same reason these publishers wouldn't give me any inventory, because on average we had very low CPMs, but for certain impressions we had really, really great CPMs. If you throw an entire channel away because on average that channel doesn't perform, then first of all, that's probably bad in general. But second of all, there's no reason for an investment in new technology. There's no reason to do the right thing because you're getting measured by an average. And so I think that's the heart of what we've been doing at Scope 3, which is our new company, which is to say, we need granular measurement of every website, every mobile app, every player in the value chain. We all need to know exactly where these emissions are coming from. And this ties back to what Daniel was talking about. There's a lot of emissions on the internet, and there are companies that are making major investments. We heard about Ecosia from Adrian. Like, these companies are making these investments, and we need to reward them by shifting spend, by doing more business with them. And we need to give everyone tools to know exactly where those emissions are coming from so that they can change their business or make different choices. So that's the basic idea of Scope 3 as a company. So Anne, I think it would be great if you could go into detail, like, what are we measuring? How are we measuring it? What does this mean for everyone in the audience about like the actual process and data we're using to really find out what are the emissions on a per publisher, per vendor basis across this crazy big internet?
Absolutely. So I'm going to walk through some of the methodology and insights that we've found on this journey of Scope 3. One thing I would add to what you just said, Brian, before I do that, is that, finding out that Ecosia is doing great things might only happen once a year when they release their sustainability report. So even if you're wanting to, make vendor-based decisions, the time to act is now. That's what the title of the IAB Europe conference today is about. And so, we want to make sure that there is that feedback loop to make more immediate decisions throughout the way that companies are choosing to act. So I'm going to walk through a little bit of the way that we're thinking about and how we're actually measuring to give this data to companies for free within the ecosystem. For publishers, ad tech vendors, agencies, and the brands themselves. So I wanted to talk a little bit about where emissions are actually coming from, and Daniel touched on this a bit before in his presentation too. Just understanding that Scope 3 emissions, which can be up to, we heard on the panel, up to 99% for digital businesses, between 65 and 90%, are these indirect emissions in your value chain. So within the digital advertising supply chain, you can see that emissions are created from lots of different steps, essentially. And all of the emissions kind of put together in this web of all the vendors that that you use within each one of these steps. So thinking about kind of the middle three here, where the media is produced, how the ad is targeted, that supply chain messy web in the middle there, and then also the actual displaying of the media and the content on the user's device, all pull together a picture of the total emissions on a given impression. So obviously the first step here is to actually measure the emissions on a kind of that granular per page, then down to per impression basis. And so what we do is we measure scrolling, not scrolling, all of the information as a page loads and renders. And we've seen this is a real example. I've sanitized the publisher content so you don't know who the publisher is. But, you know, for just one page, 53 seconds without scrolling, the number of requests, the amount of data information that is transferred, and the number of vendors that starts to build that graph is huge and kind of almost alarming when you start to see and think about all of the emissions that are being generated by virtue of just me going on a website and loading a page. Everyone talks to everyone in this industry. And so, you know, this is a less beautiful version of the diagram that Daniel showed earlier. And it's been kind of zoomed out. But when we do our analysis, we see that actually the value chains are extremely complex. And you can already see a lot of inefficiencies and redundancies from that, you know, brands and agencies have been looking at from an SPO perspective, that publishers start to look at from a DPO perspective. But this, you know, has additional lens now of emissions as well. What we also see is that emissions vary significantly by country and how the user accesses digital content. So this is a graph on the left where you can see that, you know, emissions, carbon emissions in France are significantly lower than in the UK, in the US, and in Australia, due to where the renewable energy or nuclear energy sources are. And you can see here on this graph, this actually picture changes significantly on a day-to-day basis, on a month-to-month basis, as the grid receives, you know, solar or wind energy, and the makeup changes and shifts significantly. And this also will then change according to how the user is accessing content, the device that they're using, how they've charged that device. And what we see when we build like this picture together is that on a per impression basis, emissions breakdown is quite varied. So this is a very small graph. You probably can't read the x-axis, but this is kind of a cross-section of domains that we've measured, where we've looked at all of the emissions that the publisher contributes by virtue of the, you know, the reporters and the office emissions of the actual publisher apportioned to the content, plus the creative asset loading itself, plus all of that supply chain web. And what you can see is that there is significant variation across different properties, different creatives, can actually mean that the proportion within a given impression changes considerably. And this granular data can start to help buyers and also publishers themselves make decisions about how to change this, how to improve, how to get that average down on a per impression basis, but also within given impressions as well. So you're probably thinking, what do I do about all of this? And we've had lots of interesting questions, and some of those questions actually from the panel and the Q&A kind of came up. But we just thought it would be fun to share some ideas and some thoughts that we've been having in discussions with lots of different players within the ecosystem. So I'll start with, should we make all websites text only? This is one of my personal favorites. I think this really misses the point, as you see the kind of all of the different ways that emissions contribute to that total emissions number. I think, you know, we're not trying to get anyone to stop their jobs. And I think this is a really interesting balance, as Daniel said earlier, between the user experience, the demands from the consumer on a richer experience that they're having versus, you know, the trade-off with the sustainability. So I'm definitely not suggesting that we go back to or even I think I'm not even old enough to remember when the internet looked like this. The next one.
That's not a cool dig. I heard that, and I am.
Yeah, sorry, Brian. That was a minor dig at you there. The next one: should we only advertise when it's sunny? So I wrote this slide yesterday because I was miserable in London. It was really grey, and I was thinking, well, this wouldn't be a great idea because, you know, we wouldn't have much advertising in the UK at all if that were the case. I think this one is again a blanket decision that doesn't tie in with other KPIs and outcomes that brands want to achieve and would not help to fund the internet. I think it's a really interesting way of thinking about how we can start to improve and optimize. So not just ensuring that the internet has access to green energy, not dominating green energy. I think that's something that we need to be careful of, as it's a finite resource. But, you know, having that better understanding of granularity and on grid data could be a really interesting way of optimizing, you know, making sure that you're not advertising in the middle of the night, A, because you're not going to get great performance on your campaigns, but B, probably because there's not much solar energy, and so the grid mix is much more likely to be non-renewable resources.
I will say one more thing, though, that some of the emissions are from back-end processing, and we could do some of those less real-time jobs when there is more renewable energy. I think Google's actually started some work with the Google Cloud where you can defer jobs to when energy is more renewable. So that moment of serving might not be the same decision as when we go to run a machine learning job overnight. Or maybe we cache some content on user devices when there's, you know, more renewable energy. There's ways to take advantage of this that don't impact advertising performance. And that's one of the questions that someone asked in the chat was, you know, what is this trade-off we're making? And I guess the point of this slide to me is, I'm not sure there's a trade-off in the advertising side. We can tell stories, we can connect to consumers, we can do all the things we're doing. We just need to be smarter and more focused on sustainability as part of that process and part of that journey.
Absolutely. And I think that being focused in making smart decisions leads to kind of the offsetting question, which I think is a kind of almost feels like a contentious suggestion in some ways. Are we going back to the past? Is this just an easy way out? And I think valid concerns about greenwashing. I think having just offsetting and set and forget and make that the main goal of a net zero strategy is not the way to go. But we have seen that there is a real social value to offsetting. And I'm not coining that term. That's some research been done at Imperial College London by some economists there, that, you know, the climate crisis is actually happening now. And so choice of high quality offset is a part of the solution. We saw one of the most recent IPCC reports coming out saying that, you know, actually restoring soils, having carbon removal as part of that strategy will be essential, but it's definitely not the only thing that we should be doing as an industry. And so thinking about that education piece, educating each other, and also learning about you know, where we should be investing, making sure that high quality offsets are what is being included. So making sure that we're actually removing carbon from the atmosphere for a significant amount of time, making sure that the projects that are being invested in have low risk of failure. So lots of the the initiatives from, for example, Microsoft and their fund to invest in really high quality offsets is, I think, the way to go. And then I think something that's really important as we hear more and more companies saying that they are carbon neutral is ensuring that the measurement of activity includes not just the net of once companies have said that they're carbon neutral, but also the gross emissions, so that you can still have removal as a significant part of the overall strategy of your net zero goals.
One thing I'll add on that previous slide, Anne, is one thing I like about carbon removal is we, at least in the programmatic universe, have always dealt with money. If you go back to my initial sort of problem from back in my early days, we were trying to figure out, using money as a metric, which ad or which ad network will make the publisher the most money. And one of the biggest challenges we faced was, how do you compare a CPA or a CPC versus a CPM? And I know that's a nerdy ad tech way of looking at the world, but we had to operate on an eCPM basis. What's the expected CPM we'd get if we ran this CPC ad or this CPM ad? And I know that, you know, programmatic now works on a CPM basis, but what was kind of powerful about that was we had a single currency, a single metric, and so we could make these decisions in efficient ways for publishers that they couldn't make before. So I think what we're talking about with carbon removal here, and I think we should be very careful, as Anne says, that this isn't paying $3 a metric ton to have a farmer not cut down a tree. This is, you know, really finding ways to pull carbon on a long-term basis out of the environment. You know, planting mangroves in Indonesia is definitely better in some ways because they don't burn down, because they're in water. But can we do biochar? Can we do actual carbon capture and pull carbon out of the air? There's tons of science going on here, billions of dollars of investment in this stuff. What we are good at as an industry is turning all of this complexity into decisions. We are a decisioning industry that happens to work for advertising. And I know that's exactly the opposite of talking about storytelling and everything else, but there's a reason that technology companies are at the heart of advertising right now. We are really good at turning things into money and into concrete decisions. So if we can figure out the cost of a really high quality offset, and that's going to be maybe $100 or $200 or euros per metric ton. I think actually 200 euros per metric ton was the number I saw most recently. That we can price. And so, Anne, you said that it's a gram per impression. Well, a gram per impression at 200 euros per metric ton is 20 euro cents per CPM, right? So that's a number. We know that on the average, it would only cost us 20 cents CPM to do high quality offsets for all the emissions from programmatic. And I want to put that in your head because we're not talking about a huge amount of money. That question in the chat about, you know, who pays for this? I mean, at the end of the day, you know, we all pay for this, right? It all comes back to the virtuous cycle of advertising. But, you know, would brands pay an extra 20 cent CPM to be able to be carbon neutral? Is that 20 cents better spent on solar panels like Ecosia is doing, or on biochar factories, or on not calling so many, you know, ad providers on every single impression, or just blocking non-human traffic before you render a page? I mean, that's a really cheap way to, you know, reduce your emissions, is don't show web pages and ads to bots. So this gives us a trade-off, and our entire industry exists to make these trade-offs at great scale. And, you know, with great power, with great scale comes great responsibility, but we're not talking about huge numbers. And I think that's what's so exciting about this for me, is that this offset mindset, this idea of turning it into money, is something that we uniquely can do. And I think, Anne, your second point, we can't talk about carbon neutral, like, oh, I emitted a bunch of carbon, but I offset it. I think having both columns is key. And Claire mentioned this in context of the WPP goals. It's reduce and offset. We have to show both numbers, and we have to be intellectually honest. What's cool about Ecosia is it's twice. So for every metric ton they emit, they're reducing or doing solar for 2 or 3 times. We can be regenerative as an industry. We can actually say that for every dollar you spend on digital advertising, you're going to take carbon out of the environment. And that's what's inspired me to be so excited about Scope 3 and what we're doing, and so excited about the opportunity we all have. There's enough money and enough waste that we can reduce to have a significant impact on the environment now, not in 10 or 20 years. So sorry, Anne, I'll turn it back over to you.
That was great. I think really then it comes down to some really simple things to actually act. So one is to be able to measure with granularity to know where you're at. And then I think for publishers, it's that reducing wastage. And Brian, you gave a spoiler to a couple of my next slides, which talk about some of the learnings that we've seen already from publishers that we've been working with around like some easy steps that they can make to actually start doing that reduction of waste. On the buying side, shifting spend to low carbon. And again, we can talk a little bit about that. And then offering green media products. So how can you actually build in the cost of offsetting once you've done some of the reduction, so that it doesn't become a cost, it becomes just a part of your media buying activity. So just very briefly, I know we're at time and I want to leave questions, time for questions if there are any. A couple of early learnings that we've had in terms of how you're actually being able to act on measurement from a publisher side. We've seen, lazy loading, load when the user is ready, screen out the non-human traffic first. Look at vendors' net of carbon impact. So starting to start building in sustainability factoring into your demand path optimization. And then from the buyer perspective, we've seen a real alignment between SPO and reduced emissions. So having that additional data point of how dirty an impression is can ensure that the decisions can actually be made relatively quickly on how spend gets apportioned within the ecosystem. So just to summarize, where we see kind of the real key things to be able to do now is measure, then reduce waste, shift spend, and offer green media products to really incentivize and align business decisions with something that's really good for the planet.
Yeah, and I'll just close by saying that from our perspective at Scope 3, anyone who's interested in this granular measurement, please reach out to us. We'd love to share our learnings and collaborate to help everyone measure these emissions. It's part of our mission, and it's something we're doing for free. So this is not a cost, and we'd love to work with anyone who's curious about learning more.
Brilliant. Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Anne. That was really, truly insightful. I feel like there's been so much information across this whole session today to take in, and I think a lot for everyone to think about. And at IAB Europe as well, we want to be able to provide a forum for these conversations and to keep having these conversations around sustainability. So we look forward to kind of working with different people from across the ecosystem as we continue to have these conversations and hopefully start to make a bit of a difference. Thank you also to our audience who have joined us today and for your questions that you sent across. As I mentioned at the beginning, we have recorded this session, so we'll be following up with a copy of the recording. We'll also share the presentation that Daniel sent as well, and then we can also share the presentation from Scope 3 if you're happy for us to do so with further details. But with that, I hope everyone enjoys the rest of the day, and thank you for joining us. Bye.